I used my savings to stock the empty kitchen. His mother sneered, acting like this is your house? His sister dumped rice on the floor. He smirked. I left with just my wallet. They mocked me for filling their kitchen. I left quietly. Karma showed up, and they never forgot. The wedding photos on the mantelpiece mocked me every morning. There I was, beaming in white silk, Aaron's arm around my waist, surrounded by smiling faces that now barely acknowledged my existence. 3 months. 92 days of trying to carve out a space in a house that felt more like a fortress than a home. Good morning, dear. Lorraine's voice drifted from the kitchen, sweet as honey but with an edge sharp enough to cut glass. I descended the stairs, already knowing what I'd find: dirty dishes piled in the sink, coffee grounds scattered across the counter, and that familiar smile that never quite reached her steel-gray eyes. I made fresh coffee, I offered, gesturing toward the pot I'd prepared before anyone else stirred. How thoughtful. The word hung in the air like smoke. She poured herself a cup, adding cream with deliberate slowness. Though I do prefer mine a bit stronger. Aaron always makes it just right. My chest tightened, but I nodded. I'll remember that. Aaron shuffled in moments later, hair tousled, still in yesterday's wrinkled shirt. He kissed his mother's cheek, a gesture so automatic it seemed choreographed, then glanced at me with the polite distance reserved for houseguests who'd overstayed their welcome. Morning, he mumbled, already reaching for his phone. I left your lunch on the counter, I said, pointing to the carefully wrapped sandwich I'd prepared at 6 a.m. Thanks. He didn't look up from his screen. The Aaron who used to text me heart emojis during lunch breaks had vanished somewhere between "I do" and "welcome to the family." Eliza's footsteps thundered down the stairs like a storm announcing its arrival. At 26, she moved through the house with the entitlement of someone who'd never been asked to leave, never been expected to contribute, never been anything but the eternal princess of this particular castle. Someone's been busy, she said, eyeing the clean kitchen with mock surprise. Playing house again? He crept up my neck. Just helping out. How noble. She grabbed an apple from the bowl I'd arranged, taking a deliberate bite. Though I'm pretty sure Mom's been managing this place just fine for 30 years without a live-in maid. Aaron said nothing. He scrolled through his phone with the same detached focus he'd perfected in recent weeks. I waited for him to speak up, to defend me, to acknowledge that I was his wife, not some random helper they'd reluctantly accepted. The silence stretched until it became another small death. I should get ready for work, I announced to no one in particular. The bathroom mirror reflected a stranger. A woman who'd somehow convinced herself that love could be earned through perfectly folded towels and spotless counters. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. Marriage isn't about keeping house, sweetheart. It's about building a home together. But how do you build anything when you're the only one holding the tools? I spent my lunch break at the local market, mentally cataloging Lorraine's favorite foods. She'd mentioned loving her grandmother's lentil soup during one of our rare conversations. Maybe if I learned the recipe, practiced until I got it right, she'd see me as more than an inconvenient addition to her carefully ordered world. That evening I attempted the soup. The kitchen filled with aromatic steam as onions caramelized and spices bloomed in hot oil. For a moment I felt like I belonged somewhere, even if that somewhere was just a temporary pocket of warmth between 4 walls. Smells interesting, Aaron said, appearing in the doorway. It's your mom's favorite. I found a recipe online that seemed close to what she described. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe even approval. She'll appreciate that. But when Lorraine tasted it later, she simply nodded. Not quite like Grandma Rose's, but adequate. Adequate. The word followed me to bed that night, curling around my ribs like cold fingers. Week after week I perfected my performance. I learned that Eliza liked her coffee with 2 sugars, no cream. I discovered Aaron preferred his shirts hung immediately after washing to avoid wrinkles. I memorized Lorraine's schedule, ensuring fresh flowers appeared in the living room before her bridge club meetings. Yet with each gesture I felt myself shrinking. The woman who'd once commanded boardroom presentations now tiptoed through conversations, measuring each word for potential offense. I'd become a ghost in my own marriage, haunting spaces I'd never quite managed to inhabit. One particularly brutal Tuesday, I found Eliza's friends in the living room, feet propped on the coffee table I'd polished that morning. "So you're the famous wife," one of them said, looking me up and down like I was a curiosity in a museum. Eliza says you're quite the homemaker. The way she said it made domesticity sound like a character flaw. I try to help where I can, I replied, hating how small my voice sounded. How sweet, another friend chimed in. Like having live-in staff but free. Their laughter followed me upstairs, each giggle a tiny puncture wound in my already bruised dignity. That night, staring at the ceiling while Aaron slept peacefully beside me, I made a decision. Lorraine's birthday was approaching. The perfect opportunity to show them who I really was beneath all the careful politeness. Not a maid or a convenience, but a woman capable of extraordinary things when someone bothered to see her worth. I had my savings account, my determination, and a dangerous amount of hope. What could possibly go wrong? The calendar on my phone glowed accusingly in the darkness. March 15th circled in red. Lorraine's 62nd birthday just 2 weeks away. I scrolled through family group chats, searched for mentions of plans, parties, or even acknowledgement of the approaching date. Nothing. Complete radio silence, as if her birthday existed in some parallel universe where daughters-in-law weren't expected to care. But I did care. Desperately, foolishly, completely. The next morning I opened my banking app with trembling fingers. My emergency fund stared back at me, $4,000 I'd meticulously saved over 3 years. Money meant for car repairs, medical bills, or those unexpected curveballs life throws without warning. Money that suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the possibility of earning a genuine smile from the woman who'd given birth to my husband. The farmer's market became my sanctuary that Saturday. I wandered through stalls like a woman possessed, filling my cart with ingredients I'd only dreamed of affording. Grass-fed beef for her favorite pot roast. Organic root vegetables that cost more per pound than I usually spent on groceries in a week. Saffron threads so expensive the vendor kept them locked behind glass like precious jewels. Special occasion? The spice merchant asked, carefully weighing the golden strands. The most important meal of my life, I replied, surprised by my own honesty. At the gourmet store downtown, I discovered Lorraine's holy grail, cake mix from Delacroix Patisserie, the French bakery she'd mentioned exactly once during a conversation about her childhood in Boston. The cashier rang up $38 for a single box, and I handed over my credit card without hesitation. My kitchen transformed into a covert operations center. Every evening after Aaron retreated to his laptop and Eliza disappeared into her room with takeout containers, I became a culinary spy. Recipe cards accumulated like evidence across my counter. Handwritten notes documenting failed attempts and small victories. Tuesday night, pot roast too salty. Note to self, use half the seasoning packet. Wednesday, mashed potatoes lumpy. Try using warm milk instead of cold. Thursday, green bean casserole breakthrough. The secret was caramelizing the onions first. I tasted everything in tiny spoonfuls, seasoning and adjusting until my palate became finely tuned to what I hoped were Lorraine's preferences. My fingers cramped from chopping vegetables. My back ached from hunching over the stove. But with each successful dish, hope bloomed in my chest like flowers after a long winter. The phone calls began that Friday. I locked myself in the bathroom, speaking in hushed tones to relatives I'd met only briefly at the wedding. Margaret? This is Aaron's wife. I know we haven't spoken much, but I'm planning something special for Lorraine's birthday. Her sister's voice warmed immediately. Oh honey, that's wonderful. Lorraine hasn't had a proper celebration in years. What can I do to help? One by one I contacted them all. Cousin Patricia, who lived an hour north but promised to drive down. Niece Jennifer with her twin boys who could barely contain their excitement about Aunt Laurie's surprise party. Brother-in-law Frank, who gruffly admitted he'd been meaning to visit but kept forgetting until it was too late. Each enthusiastic response felt like validation, proof that someone in this family recognized Lorraine's worth even if her own children seemed to have forgotten. She always said you were the sweet one, Margaret confided during our third conversation. Lorraine lights up when she talks about how thoughtful you are. My heart stopped. She talks about me? Of course she does. Your family now, dear. She may not show it much, you know how she is with emotions, but she notices everything you do around that house. I hung up feeling like I could float to the ceiling. Maybe my efforts hadn't been invisible after all. Maybe beneath Lorraine's cool exterior lived a woman who simply didn't know how to express gratitude, who'd been hurt too many times to risk showing vulnerability. The menu expanded beyond my original plans. Appetizers became essential. She'd mentioned loving stuffed mushrooms at her book club. I researched wine pairings online, settling on a bottle of Bordeaux that cost more than my monthly phone bill. Fresh flowers would fill every available vase, creating an atmosphere worthy of the woman who'd raised the man I loved. My credit card statements arrived with alarming balances, but I deleted the email notifications without reading them. This wasn't about money, it was about love made tangible, effort transformed into celebration. 3 nights before the party, I attempted my masterpiece, chocolate soufflé with raspberry coulis, a dessert Lorraine had ordered during our single dinner out together. The first attempt collapsed into chocolatey soup. The second burned around the edges. By the third try, my hands shook from exhaustion and caffeine, but the soufflé rose like a miracle, golden and perfect. I photographed it with tears in my eyes, not from frustration but from pure, overwhelming joy. This was what love looked like when it had nowhere else to go but into action. Aaron found me in the kitchen at midnight, surrounded by recipe cards and grocery receipts. "What's all this?" he asked, genuinely curious for the first time in weeks. "Your mother's birthday is Sunday." I waited for recognition to dawn, for him to remember, to offer help, to show any sign that he cared about celebrating the woman who'd given him life. "Right. We should probably get her a card or something." A card. After everything I'd planned, everything I'd sacrificed, he thought a drugstore greeting card would suffice. But I simply smiled and said, "I've got it covered." Because I did. I had it all covered: the food, the family, the flowers, the love. Everything except the guarantee that any of it would matter to the people who mattered most. Sunday morning arrived like a cruel joke wrapped in golden sunlight. I'd been awake since 4 a.m., my body humming with nervous energy and the kind of exhaustion that comes from weeks of secret planning. The kitchen had become my war room, every surface claiming its role in the elaborate symphony I'd orchestrated. Steam rose from pots of soaking lentils, their earthy aroma mixing with the sharp bite of marinating chicken. Garlic and ginger paste clung to my fingernails despite 3 rounds of scrubbing. My hair was pulled back in a messy bun, secured with whatever rubber band I'd found in the junk drawer. Sweat beaded along my hairline as I moved between cutting boards, my knife working through onions with mechanical precision. The house felt different in these early hours. Peaceful. Mine almost. I hummed an old tune my mother used to sing while cooking Sunday dinners. Something about love being the secret ingredient that made everything taste better. The melody filled the kitchen like incense, transforming the space into something sacred. Every chopped vegetable represented a prayer. Every measured spice held my desperate hope. The imported saffron I'd splurged on sat in a small dish, waiting to turn plain rice into something golden and magnificent. This wasn't just cooking. It was alchemy, the transformation of raw ingredients into love made edible. My phone buzzed with confirmations. Margaret would arrive at 2. Patricia was bringing her famous dinner rolls. Frank had volunteered to pick up the wine I'd specially ordered. The guest list had expanded to 15 people, each one eager to celebrate a woman they claimed to adore but rarely visited. I wiped my brow with the back of my hand, leaving a faint smudge of turmeric across my forehead like war paint. The chicken pieces turned ruby red as they absorbed the marinade I'd perfected through countless trial runs. Everything was falling into place with the precision of a Swiss watch. The floorboards creaked overhead. Someone was awake. My heart rate quickened, but I forced myself to maintain the rhythm of my work. Just a few more hours of secrecy, then the glorious reveal. I pictured Lorraine's face when she walked into a room full of family, surrounded by the aromas of her childhood, celebrated by people who understood her worth. Footsteps descended the stairs. Heavier than usual, deliberate. Lorraine appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her bathrobe, hair wrapped in curlers that made her look younger somehow. Her eyes swept across the controlled chaos I'd created. Ingredients covering every available surface, multiple pots simmering on the stove, the organized madness of a woman with a mission. "Morning," I said brightly, not pausing in my vegetable prep. "Sleep well." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked deeper into the kitchen, her slippers making soft shuffling sounds against the tile. She examined my work with the critical eye of a health inspector, taking in the expensive ingredients, the professional-level organization, the sheer scope of what I was attempting. Then she spoke, her voice sharp enough to cut through the warmth I'd been building all morning. Acting like this is your house already? The knife in my hand stopped mid-chop. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. I turned to face her, searching her expression for any hint that she was joking, that this was some kind of test I could still pass. But her eyes were cold, flat. Annoyed, as if I'd committed some unforgivable transgression by daring to cook in her kitchen. By caring enough to try. Before I could formulate a response, Eliza's voice drifted down the hallway. "What's all that noise? Some of us are trying to sleep." She appeared moments later, still in pajamas, her hair a mess of tangles and attitude. Her gaze landed on the vegetables I'd arranged by color and size, the expensive cuts of meat, the imported spices that had cost me a week's grocery budget. Without warning, she grabbed a 5-pound bag of rice from the pantry and let it drop near my feet. The plastic split on impact, sending white grains skittering across the floor like tiny pearls. The sound was deafening in the morning quiet. "Well, someone's desperate to impress," she laughed, but there was no humor in it. Only cruelty dressed up as amusement. The rice crunched under my feet as I stepped back, each grain a small explosion of my crumbling composure. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Not after everything I'd planned, everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd hoped for. Aaron's footsteps announced his arrival before he appeared, drawn by the commotion. He took in the scene with sleepy eyes, his mother's stern expression, his sister's satisfied smirk, me standing in a puddle of rice with my dreams scattered around my ankles. I looked at him with every ounce of faith I had left, silently begging him to defend me, to explain, to show them that I was his wife and this was supposed to be my home too. He shrugged, the gesture so casual it felt rehearsed. "Maybe don't overdo it. No one asked you to be the hero." The words landed like the final nail in a coffin I hadn't realized I was building. My hands froze completely, the knife suspended above a half-chopped onion. The humming stopped. The hope died. Heat rose in my face, but it wasn't from shame, it was from clarity. Crystal clear, devastating understanding that burned away every illusion I'd been clinging to for 3 months. They didn't want me to succeed. They didn't want to be surprised. They wanted me to stay in the background, invisible and grateful, putting in effort without expecting recognition or love in return. I was a convenience, not a family member. A service provider, not a daughter-in-law. The rice continued to crunch beneath my feet as I stood perfectly still, finally seeing the truth that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The silence that followed Aaron's words stretched like a wire about to snap. I stood there, surrounded by scattered rice and shattered expectations, waiting for someone, anyone, to realize what they'd just done. But Lorraine simply stepped over the mess and began making her coffee. Eliza yawned dramatically and announced she was going back to bed. Aaron grabbed his phone and disappeared into the living room. They left me standing there like a broken appliance they'd grown tired of using. I bent down slowly, gathering handfuls of rice with robotic movements. Each grain felt like a small defeat between my fingers. The expensive ingredients I'd lovingly arranged seemed to mock me from their positions around the kitchen. Witnesses to my humiliation, evidence of my foolishness. The day crawled by with agonizing normalcy. Lorraine watched her morning talk shows. Eliza painted her nails on the kitchen counter, pointedly ignoring the remaining evidence of my preparations. Aaron worked on his laptop, occasionally glancing up with an expression that suggested he'd already forgotten our morning encounter. But I remembered everything. Every dismissive glance, every cruel laugh, every moment they'd made me feel like an intruder in what was supposed to be my own home. As evening shadows crept across the kitchen floor, something inside me shifted. Not broke, shifted. Like a lock finally clicking into the right position after months of fumbling with the wrong key. I waited until the house settled into its familiar rhythm of indifference. Lorraine retreating to her bedroom with her mystery novel. Eliza disappearing upstairs with a bag of takeout she hadn't offered to share. Aaron sprawled on the couch, lost in whatever world existed behind his laptop screen. Then I began my work. I moved through the kitchen like a surgeon performing the most important operation of my career. Every ingredient I'd purchased, every item I'd carefully selected, every piece of my broken dreams, I reclaimed them all. The grass-fed beef went into a cooler bag first. 4 pounds of premium meat that had cost me $63. I wrapped it carefully, my movements precise and deliberate. This wasn't theft, this was justice. The saffron came next, those precious golden threads still in their tiny glass container. $38 per ounce, more valuable than gold, purchased with money I'd earned through nights of overtime and skipped lunches. My fingers didn't shake as I placed it in the bag. Jar by jar I emptied the pantry of my contributions. The imported olive oil from Italy. The aged balsamic vinegar. The specialty spices I'd researched and ordered online. Each item represented hours of my life, money from my account, hope from my heart. The refrigerator surrendered its treasures without protest. Organic vegetables that had cost more than Eliza spent on her weekly manicures. The expensive cake mix from Delacroix Patisserie, still in its elegant box, still promising celebration for people who didn't deserve it. I found the birthday candles in the junk drawer, 62 of them in a rainbow of colors. I'd counted them twice at the store, imagining Lorraine's face illuminated by their warm glow. Now they felt like tiny weapons of my own naivety. The wine went into its own bag. That $130 bottle of Bordeaux I'd researched for hours, chosen specifically because it was born the same year as Lorraine. I'd imagined proposing a toast, watching her eyes light up with surprise and gratitude. What a fool I'd been. My phone buzzed with messages from the family members I'd contacted. Margaret asking what time she should arrive. Patricia wondering if she needed to bring anything besides the dinner rolls. Frank confirming he'd picked up the ice. I stared at the screen, these people who were already driving toward disappointment, toward an empty house and a woman who'd never appreciated their effort either. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, crafting and deleting responses. Finally I typed the truth. Plans changed. Lorraine wasn't interested in celebrating after all. The responses came quickly. Confusion. Disappointment. Margaret's voicemail filled with genuine sadness for a celebration that would never happen. These people had been willing to drop everything for someone who couldn't even pretend to want their love. I deleted the entire group chat. The kitchen looked different now. Sterile, ordinary, stripped of the potential I'd imagined it held. The expensive ingredients had been its costume jewelry, making it appear more valuable than it actually was. Without them, it was just another room in a house that had never been mine. I found a pen and a scrap of paper, writing 5 words that summarized 3 months of wasted effort. Feed your ego. It's the only thing you ever appreciated. The note fit perfectly on the top shelf of the pantry, tucked behind an old box of crackers where Lorraine would eventually find it. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday when she was looking for something that used to be there. My duffel bag packed itself with surprising efficiency. 3 months of marriage and everything I truly owned fit into a single piece of luggage. The wedding photos stayed on the dresser. They belonged to the woman who'd believed in fairy tales, not the one who was walking away from them. I called Sarah, my college roommate who'd been texting concerned messages for weeks. "Can I crash on your couch for a while?" "Of course," she said without hesitation. "What happened?" "I'll tell you when I get there." The front door closed behind me with a soft click. No dramatic exit, no tearful confrontation, no explanations that would fall on deaf ears anyway. I simply walked away from the house that had never been home, carrying nothing but what belonged to me and the quiet dignity I'd finally remembered how to wear. The night air felt crisp against my skin as I loaded my car, each breath filling my lungs with something I hadn't tasted in months: freedom. Sarah's couch had become my sanctuary, an island of peace in an ocean of uncertainty. I'd spent the day in borrowed pajamas, drinking tea that actually tasted good for the first time in months. My phone sat face down on the coffee table, deliberately ignored, its silence more comforting than any conversation I'd had in weeks. But at exactly 6:15 p.m., it began to buzz with the persistence of an angry wasp. I flipped it over reluctantly. Margaret's name flashed across the screen, followed immediately by Patricia's. Then Jennifer's. A cascade of missed calls and increasingly frantic text messages painted a picture I didn't need to witness firsthand. "Honey, we're standing outside Lorraine's house and no one's answering the door. The lights are on but something's wrong. Should we be worried? Patricia drove 2 hours for this. What's happening?" Sarah emerged from her bedroom, hair wrapped in a towel, drawn by the constant buzzing. "Your phone's having a seizure." "It's starting," I said quietly, and somehow she understood without explanation. The doorbell at Lorraine's house would have chimed its familiar 2-note melody at exactly 6:30. I knew because I'd timed everything perfectly, accounting for Margaret's tendency to arrive early and Frank's habit of showing up fashionably late. The sound would have echoed through the house like a gunshot, shattering the illusion of normalcy they'd constructed after my departure. My phone rang again. This time it was Frank. "What the heck is going on over there?" His voice boomed through the speaker before I could even say hello. "Patricia's standing on the porch with her famous dinner rolls and nobody knows why we're here." Through the phone, I could hear the murmur of confused voices, the rustle of gift bags, the awkward shuffling of feet belonging to people who dressed up for a celebration that didn't exist. "Frank, I'm not there anymore." "What do you mean you're not there? You called us. You planned this whole thing." The weight of what I'd set in motion crashed over me like a wave. These people had rearranged their Sunday evenings, driven distances, prepared food, wrapped gifts. All because I'd convinced them that someone cared enough to celebrate Lorraine properly. "I need to hang up," I whispered, but Frank's voice cut through my retreat. "Hold on, someone's opening the door." I should have ended the call. Should have spared myself the second-hand humiliation about to unfold. But some masochistic part of me needed to hear what happened when reality collided with expectation. Aaron's voice filtered through the phone, muffled but audible. "Oh. Hi everyone. We weren't expecting company." Margaret's confusion rang clear as a bell. "Expecting company? Aaron, dear, your wife invited us for your mother's birthday celebration. Where is she?" The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Eliza's voice, sharp with defensive irritation. "She's not here. And there's no party. I don't know what she told you people, but..." "What do you mean there's no party?" Patricia's voice carried the indignation of someone who'd spent hours perfecting dinner rolls for ungrateful recipients. "She called me personally. Said Lorraine deserved to feel special. We've been planning this for weeks." More silence. The kind that grows heavier with each passing second, weighted with implications and uncomfortable truths. Frank's voice came through clearly now, closer to his phone. "Where's your wife, Aaron?" "She left. Yesterday." The collective intake of breath was audible even through my phone's tiny speaker. 15 people processing the same devastating realization simultaneously. They'd been pawns in someone else's family drama, witnesses to a marriage's collapse disguised as birthday planning. Jennifer's voice, younger and more direct than the others. "She left? Why would she leave right before the party she planned?" Aaron's response was barely a mumble, but Frank's phone caught it anyway. "There was a misunderstanding." "What kind of misunderstanding?" Margaret's teacher voice emerged, the tone she'd probably used to extract truth from decades of fibbing students. This time it was Lorraine who answered, her words carrying the brittle defensiveness of someone caught in an uncomfortable spotlight. She was being presumptuous, acting like she owned the place. "We never asked for any of this." The silence that followed was different, not confused but shocked. The kind of quiet that happens when people witness something so fundamentally wrong they need time to process it. Uncle Frank, usually the most diplomatic person in any room, spoke with a coldness I'd never heard from him before. "Presumptuous? She tried to honor you, Lorraine. She called every single one of us excited about celebrating your birthday. She said you deserved to feel special. Well, nobody asked her to. Nobody asked her to love you?" Margaret's voice cut through Lorraine's protest like a knife through paper. "Nobody asked her to care enough about this family to spend her own money, her own time, her own heart trying to make you happy?" My grip tightened on the phone. These people barely knew me, had met me only briefly at the wedding, yet they understood something that Lorraine, Aaron, and Eliza had missed entirely. Patricia's voice joined the chorus, trembling with disappointment. "I made 4 dozen dinner rolls. Frank drove from Springfield. Margaret canceled her book club. We did all this because that sweet girl convinced us you were worth celebrating. And where is she now?" Frank's question hung in the air like an accusation. The one person who cared enough to organize this whole thing? Aaron's voice was smaller now, defensive but defeated. "She overreacted. Made a big deal out of nothing." "Nothing?" Jennifer's laugh held no humor. "She invited your entire extended family to celebrate your mother's birthday, and you call that nothing?" The conversation continued, but I could no longer bear to listen. I ended the call and set the phone aside, my hands shaking not from sadness but from vindication. Strangers had seen my worth more clearly than the people who were supposed to love me. Sarah sat beside me, offering silent comfort as my phone continued its relentless buzzing. Messages of support from people who'd witnessed the truth, apologies from relatives who finally understood what had really happened, and one text that made my throat tight with emotion. It was from Margaret. "That family doesn't deserve you, honey. But we see you. We see what you tried to do." Margaret's text glowed on my screen like a beacon, but I set the phone aside without reading the others. The buzzing had finally stopped, leaving behind a silence that felt different from the oppressive quiet of Lorraine's house. This silence belonged to me. "You okay?" Sarah asked, settling into the armchair across from me with her own cup of tea. "I think so." The words surprised me with their honesty. "Actually, I think I'm better than okay." She studied my face with the careful attention of someone who'd known me through college heartbreaks and career disappointments. "Look different. Lighter maybe." I felt lighter. Like I'd been carrying invisible weights for months and had finally set them down. The constant tension in my shoulders was gone. The knot in my stomach had disappeared. For the first time in 3 months, I could breathe without measuring each exhale against someone else's expectations. "I need to get out of here for a bit," I said, surprising myself again. "Not forever, just. I need some air that doesn't smell like other people's disappointment." The evening had turned crisp, typical for early March. I walked without destination, letting my feet choose the path while my mind slowly untangled itself from the web of obligation and hope I'd been trapped in. Street lamps cast pools of yellow light on empty sidewalks, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once then fell silent. 3 blocks from Sarah's apartment, I discovered a small cafe I'd never noticed before. "Moonlight Brew" announced itself in modest cursive across a window that glowed with warm amber light. Through the glass, I could see mismatched furniture, local art on exposed brick walls, and exactly the kind of unpretentious atmosphere I hadn't realized I'd been craving. The bell above the door timed softly as I entered. Only a handful of customers occupied the space. A young couple sharing a laptop, an elderly man reading a thick paperback, a woman about my age sketching in a notebook. No one looked up. No one expected anything from me. "What can I get you?" The barista's smile was genuine but undemanding, the kind of professional kindness that asked for nothing in return. "Earl Grey tea, please." And I scanned the display case, my eyes landing on a simple slice of lemon cake. "That one. Good choice. The lemon cake is homemade. My grandmother's recipe." The word grandmother might have stung in another context, another life. Tonight it just sounded pleasant. Someone's beloved family recipe, shared freely with strangers who had no obligation to appreciate it. I chose a table by the window, settling into a chair that had probably been secondhand when the cafe opened but felt more comfortable than the designer furniture I'd been tiptoeing around for months. The tea arrived in a mismatched cup and saucer, the cake on a small plate that bore tiny chips along its edge. Perfect imperfections. No pretense. No performance. Steam rose from my cup as I wrapped my hands around it, letting the warmth seep through my palms. The first sip was exactly what tea should be, strong enough to matter, delicate enough to savor. The lemon cake was moist and tart, with the kind of simple satisfaction that expensive desserts often missed in their complexity. Outside the window, the city moved at its unhurried Sunday evening pace. A family walked by, parents and 2 small children bundling toward home after what looked like dinner out. The kids were animated, gesturing wildly as they told some story that made their parents laugh. No one was performing. No one was keeping score. They were just living. Another couple passed, older, walking slowly with linked arms. The woman pointed at something in a shop window, and her partner leaned in to see what had caught her attention. Such a small gesture, but it spoke of decades of paying attention to each other's interests, of caring about the tiny things that brought each other joy. I took another bite of cake and realized I was smiling. Not the careful, measured smile I'd perfected for Lorraine's approval, but the unconscious expression of someone who was genuinely content. When had I last felt this way? Before the wedding, certainly. Maybe before the engagement. Before I'd started editing myself to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. My phone remained silent in my purse. Aaron hadn't called. Neither had Lorraine or Eliza. Part of me had expected some attempt at damage control, some grudging acknowledgement that maybe they'd handled things poorly. But their silence was perhaps the most honest communication we'd had in months. They weren't sorry. They were probably relieved. The realization should have hurt, but instead it felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. I'd been trying so hard to earn love from people who had no intention of giving it, fighting for acceptance from those who'd already decided I didn't belong. The woman at the corner table closed her sketchbook and stretched, catching my eye as she looked around the cafe. She smiled. Not because she knew me or wanted something, but just because humans sometimes smile at each other for no reason other than shared existence in a pleasant space. I smiled back and the gesture felt as natural as breathing. Outside, the family with small children had returned, walking the other direction now. One of the kids had convinced someone to buy him ice cream despite the March chill, and he was eating it with the focused determination of someone who knows this moment won't last forever. That's what this was, I realized. This moment, this peace, this freedom from the exhausting work of trying to be someone else. It was ice cream on a cool evening. Simple, perfect, and entirely mine. The tea had cooled to the perfect drinking temperature, and the cake had disappeared bite by bite while I watched the world continue its gentle rotation outside my window. For the first time in 3 months, I wasn't waiting for anything. Not for approval, not for acknowledgement, not for love that came with conditions in fine print. I was just here in this moment, complete and whole and exactly where I belonged. If this story of quiet dignity and self-respect had you completely captivated, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when she silently reclaimed every single ingredient she'd bought, taking back her dignity one piece at a time. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful stories of finding your worth. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.